You can't just tear up my land like this. I don't care what permits you have.
We have every legal right to be here, sir. Step aside. I need you to sign these permits immediately, or we will be forced to take action.
Looks like your rules are blowing away, just like the rest of the city.
You ever wake up one morning, look outside your window, and see a bunch of strangers digging through your land without even asking you? Yeah. That's exactly how this story starts. I live on a 60-acre ranch, just outside a quiet suburban town. It's peaceful, calm, and exactly the life I always wanted: open skies, horses grazing, and that gentle sound of wind brushing through the tall grass every morning. That's my paradise. At least, it was, until that one morning. Because that day, I woke up to a sound that didn't belong there: heavy engines rumbling, metal clanging, and men shouting over each other. At first, I thought maybe it was some roadwork happening nearby. But when I looked out my window, my jaw just dropped. There were construction trucks, backhoes, and a whole crew of workers digging a massive trench right across my property line. I threw on my boots, stormed outside, and yelled, "Hey! What the hell are you doing on my land?" One of the workers, a guy in a bright yellow vest, looked up casually, like this was no big deal, and said, "Oh, we're installing a water pipeline for the HOA community next door." I froze for a second, not believing what I just heard. "You mean the Heron Creek Estates HOA?" I asked. He nodded, completely calm, like this was business as usual. "Yeah. Their president said we had permission. We're almost halfway done." I blinked. Permission? From who? Because it sure as hell wasn't from me. I told them to stop immediately, but the guy just shrugged. He said, "Take it up with the HOA. We're just following orders." And then, he went right back to digging like I didn't even exist. That's when it hit me. These people, this HOA, had actually trespassed onto my property and started building their new private water line. No contract. No phone call. No permission. Nothing. They just assumed they could do whatever they wanted because, of course, they were from a fancy gated community next door. So I pulled out my phone and called their HOA office. No one picked up. Then I called the number for their president, Karen Mitchell. And yes, her name was literally Karen. When she finally answered, she had that smug, self-important tone you can almost feel through the phone. I said, "You've got construction workers tearing through my land right now." And she said, all calm, like I was overreacting, "Oh yes, we're expanding our water line. It's a community project. You'll hardly even notice it." I said, "You're trespassing, Karen." And she replied, "Relax. It's for the public benefit. You can't stop progress." That was it. That smug tone. That attitude. The assumption that my property didn't matter. You know that feeling when someone just completely disrespects you and acts like they're doing you a favor? That was exactly it. And that's when I decided she had no idea who she was talking to. Because if she did, she'd have thought twice before messing with me. You see, I wasn't just some ranch owner with a bit of land. I had connections, and more importantly, I knew exactly how water worked in this county. But at that moment, I stayed quiet. I didn't tell her anything. I just said, "All right, Karen. If that's how you want to play it, go ahead." And I hung up. Then I just stood there, watching those workers continue to dig that ugly scar through my land, tearing up the soil, breaking fences, and leaving muddy tire tracks across my pasture. My horses were restless. My dogs were barking nonstop. And I was standing there, fists clenched, trying not to lose my temper. Because I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. Not even close. So I started taking photos. Videos. Drone shots. Every detail. I documented every inch of damage, every piece of machinery, every single line they cut through. Because I knew one day soon, all of that would come in handy. And deep down, I started forming a plan. A quiet, patient plan, one that would teach that HOA a lesson they'd never forget. Because little did they know. They weren't just digging a pipeline through my land. They were digging their own hole. See, I'm not just some ranch owner living off the grid. I'm not that guy who raises horses and drinks coffee on the porch all day, though I do love that part of my life. But behind that quiet rancher exterior, I run something a little bigger. I own Western Springs Utility, a private company that supplies water to several towns in this region. Yeah. You heard that right. Every drop of water flowing through their fancy faucets, their pools, their manicured lawns, comes straight from my company. And you know what's the best part? One of those towns, the very one that feeds Heron Creek Estates, is connected directly to my network. So technically, that HOA and their queen bee, Karen, they already depended on me. They just didn't know it yet. But I didn't say a single word to her about that. Not yet. Instead, I played it cool. I told her, fine, go ahead with your little project. Because see, when people think they've won, they stop being careful. And I was counting on that. A week later, they held this big community event, the ribbon-cutting ceremony for their new water pipeline. Karen was there in her expensive sunglasses, her perfect little outfit, smiling for cameras like she just solved world hunger. They even had a banner that said, Heron Creek, self-sustained future. I almost laughed. She stood there holding these giant golden scissors, cutting that red ribbon, as the crowd clapped and cheered. But what none of them knew was that their precious new pipeline was illegally connected straight into my company's main supply line. And that was the key. Because I controlled the valve. The next morning, I called my operations manager. He's been with me for over a decade, smart guy, loyal, and doesn't ask questions he doesn't need to. I said, hey, shut down all secondary lines feeding into Heron Creek. Mark it as maintenance. He asked, maintenance? For how long? I smiled and said, let's see how long it takes them to call. 2 hours later, my phone rang. I didn't even need to look at the caller ID. Hello? I answered. A familiar voice snapped, this is Karen from Heron Creek. We're having a water outage, none of the homes have pressure. I pretended to sound worried. Oh no, that's terrible. Must be something with the new line you built. Did you get proper permits for that? There was a pause. You could almost hear the panic setting in. She said, well, the contractor handled that. I said, Because from our end, it looks like someone tapped into our main line without authorization. That's a serious issue. Her voice dropped. Wait, what do you mean unauthorized? I kept my tone professional, almost too calm. Ma'am, tapping into a utility line without legal approval is a federal offense. You might want to check your paperwork. Silence. A long one. Then she muttered, I'll get back to you. By the end of that day, chaos had taken over Heron Creek. Their perfectly green lawns were drying out. Their swimming pools were half empty. Residents were calling the HOA nonstop. And my phone? It didn't stop ringing. I started getting calls from the HOA board members, even random residents, all saying the same thing. Our water's gone. You have to fix this. And every time, I gave them the same calm answer. I'd love to help. But until the trespassing issue on my property is resolved, we can't legally reconnect service. That line hit them like a brick wall. Karen completely lost it. She screamed, you can't do this. Our entire community needs water. You can't just shut us off. And that's when I dropped the bomb. Karen, I said slowly, do you remember the ranch you dug through? The one you said didn't matter? The one you called progress? There was silence. Then I continued. That land belongs to me. And so does the company that supplies your water. Another silence, longer this time. I could practically hear her jaw hit the floor through the phone. Then she whispered, you're joking. I said, not even a little. And I let that hang there for a moment, just long enough for the weight of it to sink in. Because at that moment, she finally realized. The man she brushed off, the one whose land she trespassed on, was the same man who held the faucet that kept her entire community alive. And trust me, this story was far from over. The next week was pure chaos for the HOA. Residents were furious. Their manicured gardens started drying up. The fancy fountains stopped flowing. People couldn't even take proper showers. The whole luxury-gated community started looking more like a ghost town, angry homeowners shouting, sprinklers sitting dead in the dirt, and the board members fighting among themselves every single day. And right in the middle of it all was Karen. The woman who once told me, "You can't stop progress." Well, progress had stopped hard. About 5 days in, I was out near the barn feeding my horses when I saw a car pulling up the dirt road. A shiny black SUV, and out stepped Karen herself. She was wearing heels. On a ranch. In the middle of summer. You could tell she wasn't built for this kind of confrontation. She was sweating, hair sticking to her forehead, clutching her designer handbag like it might protect her from the heat or from me. She walked up to the fence and said, trying to sound calm, "Look, maybe we started off on the wrong foot. We can make this right. Just turn the water back on, and we'll work something out." I leaned against the gate, folded my arms, and looked her dead in the eye. "Karen," I said, "you already made it wrong. You trespassed. You built a line across private property. And you violated utility law. You're not negotiating from power here, you're begging." She blinked, taken aback. I'm sure we can come to some arrangement. Our residents are suffering. You don't want to hurt innocent families, do you?" I shook my head. "You hurt them, not me. You'll remove the pipeline, restore my land, and file a public apology with the county, or the water stays off." Her expression shifted. That polite smile disappeared, and out came the old Karen tone. She crossed her arms and snapped, "You can't do this. We'll take legal action." I smiled a slow, deliberate smile. "Please do. Every minute you delay, your residents lose another gallon of water." That one hit hard. She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Because she knew I was serious. She turned around, stomped back to her SUV, and drove off without another word. A few days later, the HOA caved. They hired a full team of contractors to dig up their precious illegal pipeline, every inch of it. Thousands of dollars wasted. The sound of backhoes and drills echoed again, but this time, they were undoing everything they built. And I watched the whole thing from my porch, sipping coffee, letting the sight of it sink in. You know that quiet satisfaction you get when the universe serves karma cold and clean? Yeah. That was it. They didn't stop there, though. The HOA board had to issue a formal apology letter to me and to the county acknowledging that they trespassed and connected illegally to a private water line. They even paid for restoring the land they tore up, every fence post, every foot of soil, every bit of grass. And I wasn't done just yet. I called my company's PR team and told them, "Let's make sure the community knows what happened. Keep it factual, but public." The next day, the press release went out. Unauthorized connection to Western Springs utility line by Heron Creek HOA resolved. Company thanks local authorities for swift cooperation. That headline hit local news within hours. It spread on Facebook, community groups, neighborhood pages everywhere. And just like that, the residents of Heron Creek turned on Karen. The same people who once praised her for improving the neighborhood were now demanding her resignation. They blamed her for the embarrassment, the money lost, the days without water, everything. Within a week, she was forced to step down as HOA president. No ceremony. No goodbyes. Just gone. Now, every time I ride past that border fence on my ranch, I look at that patch of land they once tore up and it makes me smile. The grass has grown back. The soil's healed. You'd never know there was once a pipeline there, except for the small sign I put up. It reads, "Private property, do not trespass." And underneath it, in tiny letters, "Water flows both ways. Because sometimes, karma doesn't take years. Sometimes, it doesn't wait for justice to arrive. Sometimes, it flows, just like water. Right back to where it belongs. Clapperboard, the end.